discussion of the day. Brandon, we're honored, right?
That's awesome. It's awesome. We've got to get somebody. Somebody's got to be the warm up act, right? Might as well be us.
That's right. That's right. That's good. Hey, sometimes the warm up act is the best one. I'm not calling that
There you
shot at
go.
this point, but we're going to do our best to be big. Um, just for a quick intro for everybody. Hello, my name is Colin Johnson. I lead the retail and QSR verticals over here at Nextdoor. Hopefully, you guys have heard of us. It's been a pretty big year for Nextdoor. I would say during COVID, everyone has probably found in their daily lives that they now know their neighbors better than they did before. And in many cases, perhaps Nextdoor was instrumental in helping facilitate those connections. And from an advertiser perspective, it has been an exciting time as well. Nextdoor allows brands to reach consumers while they are in that local mindset and actually activate local at scale media, or rather national advertising that's then dynamically deployed in the language of the neighborhood. And so it's super exciting to be here today and to be talking to Bert and across his entire career, as well as what he's doing today at Potbelly, because the brand he represents is truly a great example of a brand we all know and love. I love their switches, but at the execution level, their store locations and the people that represent their business are truly members of the communities that we live in. And so, Brandon, I will pass it to you first and have you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about what you're doing.
Yeah. So thank you, Colin. I started in the agency world, ended up at Wendy's, built a digital social team at Wendy's, ultimately took over creative and media and everything, and along with digital and social from a marketing communication standpoint there. Spent some time at Papa John's working e-commerce, converting them over to some e-commerce work, and then have been at Potbelly for the last couple of years, basically working on their brand strategy and their approach to the market. Typically, brands bring me in when they want to digitize. Usually, I only spend a couple of years kind of doing the work and getting things set, and then I move on to the next thing. But that's really been my work for the last couple of years here is set this brand up for future success, for strong positioning, strong marketing, and a modern connection to media with folks like Nextdoor.
That is awesome. Well, if it's okay with you, how about we just jump right in to the good stuff?
Let's do it.
Sounds perfect. You just quickly walked through your background, and it was great to speak earlier and get to understand a bit about what you've been doing. Obviously, the last many years, you have a decorated career, and really from Wendy's to Papa John's and now Potbelly's, you and the teams that you've led have really made a name for themselves as change agents. And as you landed in your current role, what were some of the first areas you focused on, and how did those prove to be beneficial as COVID spun up?
Yeah, so I'd say any new marketer who comes into play has got to do their homework, and I think we're all going to have to do a lot of homework very shortly here because consumer habits are going to change because people's sort of desire to get out and experience the world again is probably going to reemerge and maybe in a very different way than it was pre-COVID. But I always start with do the homework, figure out who the consumer is, where the demand is, figure out exactly how that brand then can fulfill that demand and meet that consumer where they're making decisions. So my first part of every job is really the first 6 or 9 months is just that research, that homework. And that typically leads you to a few big priorities that clearly define this is how you need to tackle this in order to see some change. Sometimes those are things you can enact pretty quickly. We know that we're not reaching this audience, therefore let's spin up a digital team, or let's spin up a social presence, or let's create media that is actually going to meet people where they are, and I'm making those decisions. Sometimes it's harder. Sometimes they got to fix the offering, like the menu, or we got to fix our upfront process and the media mix as a whole. And oftentimes you confront a lot of tradition that's in the organization, and organizations tend to steer towards what they're used to, what the past told them worked. And sometimes that past is 15, 20 years earlier where there weren't choices that you have now. Our marketing toolbox is huge. And when you didn't have those tools at your disposal, a lot of times you make decisions based on that gravity of the previous success versus what's happening now. So the short answer to what you ask is a lot of homework that leads to a short list of priorities. Then you start tackling those priorities. And when you feel like they've made enough progress that you can't help anymore. You look for the next thing to go try to work on. And ultimately, you need to make pretty significant changes in a lot of organizations that have been stuck for a while. So you end up fighting a lot of history and fighting a lot of internal politics to get that thing done. But yeah, so and in places like Wendy's, where you're talking about billions of dollars of business and thousands of locations all around the world, sometimes it takes a couple of years to see results. In places that you need to make fundamental changes like the offering, it takes many years sometimes to see results. But once in a while, you get lucky and you can change something, and within 6 months, you see a change. So I think if you look back in my career, and anybody that looks like has the kind of history I do, oftentimes you see a similar pattern. Define the problem after you do some research, and then start tackling them one at a time.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And some of the things you mentioned there are not able to be affected by marketing, right? If your menu needs to change, that's not something you're in control of, but certainly you're messaging the market about the products that your company is bringing forth. And we also heard in the intro how the brands Teads is working with are shifting from branding in many cases into performance marketing. And I'd say that's an overall theme that you've mentioned to me, and I've heard from a lot of other folks. It's this focus on return on investment, this focus on ROI that, of course, has always been there, but now has an even greater focus as every brand has been forced to be very precise with how to spend their money in a time when many businesses are being challenged. And I guess one of my open-ended questions for you there, and there's probably no one right answer, but how do you balance short-term ROI thinking versus long-term ROI thinking? And can you do both at the same time when talking about media and advertising?
Yeah, I'd argue a typical plan, you have to create short-term wins while you're developing the brand and creating that longer-term affinity to the brand. COVID, though, was unique, right? Where people have cash flow crunches that never existed at some businesses. Businesses that were profitable year over year, even if they weren't growing, all of a sudden we're fighting for their survival. So when your CFO comes to you, or the senior leadership team gets together, and the decision is made, hey, we got to cut, and we don't have a choice. We either cut or we struggle. We're gonna struggle to stay open. You have to choose the things that give you the short-term win. And I think the trap is if you stay in that short-term space, because ultimately the short-term conversions, the performance marketing has to be a part of the plan, but it's a part. If you don't have a larger brand, if you don't actually create long-term relationship with consumers, you're going to always just try to stack over that little point, over that little point, over that little point, versus actually see like momentum behind the brand. So, here and even at previous organizations I've been at, when you run into a crunch, what goes away first is the stuff that you can't for sure say, I'm going to get a win this quarter or this week or whatever. But ultimately, I think that actually makes us better marketers when that happens. It's like the fasting cycle some people go through. It makes you more efficient because it makes you question things that maybe were just part of the plan because they've always been part of a plan, versus things that are genuinely effective. I would argue, though, you got to make sure you have the right tools in place to really measure what is effective. And a lot of brands struggle with that. We still struggle with it, where I'm at. But making sure you have the tools in place that you actually understand the result of your actions, not just short term, but also long term, on brand perception, on changes of behavior over time, of how you affect the journey that consumers take to get to you and to get to your competitors. You got to measure this stuff and understand the difference between those two things.
That makes sense. And would you say then it's possible to be both a performance marketer and a brand marketer at the same time? Can that same consumer message achieve both of those goals?
I'm not sure it's necessarily the exact same message, but you absolutely you should have a layered plan. If you're in retail and you don't have a layered plan, I think you're failing your brand. You have to have a layer that you can prove converts to sales. And then you have to have a layer, ideally, that is actually creating long-term relationships and affinity. You go back to my Wendy's days, the layer that was the performance layer was 4 for 4 from a message standpoint. And that 4 for 4 layer and value and LTOs and things like that, you treated that a bit differently. That was the 15-second ad on TV that was quick and had the hard hit of, this is the thing we want you to buy. You had a touch a brand in there, but it was 70%, buy this thing, and 30%, the brand is here. Then you have a totally different layer. So that value layer is out there driving an immediate response, but not necessarily a sustained response, a response that lasts more than a transaction or two. And then on top of it, you put things in play like the challenger message, the snarky brand we put on social. And on top of that, fresh never frozen beef for a bit of an older audience. Those are the brand building messages that ultimately create a relationship and affinity. You got to kind of soften the ground with the brand building while you're driving a transaction with a bit of value. And I'd also argue in many cases, you're talking to different people. The person that's making the decision based on, snarky Wendy, I can relate to this brand, sort of like holding the Starbucks cup with the logo up and being proud that you're, sharing the same viewpoint, is making a different set of decisions than the person who says, I don't get paid till Friday, so I need this to get, lunch. So I think you need those layers just to survive as any retail business almost. I mean, look at luxury brands. BMW still runs sales. So to say that you're not going to need a value layer, even in a luxury brand or in an extremely expensive product, I think is fooling yourself in most cases. The brands that don't need that, and there are very, very few, more power to them, but most need something, at least every once in a while, to create access.
Yeah, I think, the hardest thing the brands have in front of them is truly crafting that message that resonates with maybe not every consumer, but the target consumers, the group that's going to help them create that affinity that you mentioned. And I think certainly over the last many years, it's really data and insights that a lot of times unlock some of those ahas. And do you have any best practices? I mean, you've consistently put up wins in this column. What have you seen? What sort of data sources, what sort of methodologies are successful in helping unlock those consumer insights that lead to a message and an opportunity that truly creates that affinity with a brand?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, you do have to create some internal education on the difference between anecdotal information and actual facts that have scale and create demand. So I think step one is just an internal discussion about what is the information we need to go seek and what is information we can rely on and understand we're going to see conflict in that information. We have to make some decisions based on that. But to get to the kind of heart of your question, traditional methods still work pretty well there in some cases, doing surveys, doing focus groups that help you narrow what to speak to on an individual audience. But really today at scale, once you get past the big chunks like groups to target and the sort of things they're interested in and the area of demand that you begin to focus on, it's amazing what you can do with digital marketing today. And that's generally where I take brands, is usually I'm the guy brought in to modernize and to move media, and usually a lot of media, over to digital platforms, because you can learn so damn fast, right? You put an ad in play in most social networks and you can iterate on copy. You can iterate on, and you're going to have to choose a base message. You're going to have to choose a base set of creative. You're going to have to choose a base target for an audience. But past that, you can figure it out in a matter of usually days. And the algorithms help you make some of those decisions to say, well, what are people actually responding to? Now you have to be a bit careful, because obviously if you create a message that's more value-based, the chances of getting a click can go up than something that's more brand-based. But as long as you bring your own, common sense and marketing experience to that information, social listening and testing more ads in the real world, especially through digital, can get you really, really fast to a point where what's giving you that ROAS and giving you confidence that you should continue to invest. But again, you got to start with a baseline of, I have good information of who to talk to, that they are actually interested in what I'm going to tell them, exactly how to say that thing that's going to be compelling and convert, and ultimately understand that that's a customer I want to hold on to, not just a customer I'm going to acquire once and then have to go find somebody else every time I want to sell something. So a lot of research and then a lot of testing, usually using digital platforms to vet out how to say it and where to say it and who to say it to.
There's no question digital enables a velocity for testing that really wasn't available in other mediums before this. Obviously, your background has been anchored in digital and in data, and these different companies you've gone to, you've taken digital transformation to the next level. We've obviously used the word digital a lot there in that last sentence. Do you consider yourself a digital marketer first, or are you media agnostic?
Yeah, I believe you do what works. And, if you're trying to reach a certain target and that certain target is sitting in front of the TV during, Sunday night football and you got to buy that $800,000 30-second unit, that's what you buy. As long as it converts and you see more benefit for the business because of it. I am entirely media agnostic. I do think people that come up in digital marketing tend to be more open to whatever platform works. I cringe a bit anytime I hear somebody say digital first, only because I'm not sure that really is a thing anymore. The truth is, it's customer first. Figure out where people are and then how to affect their behavior, and then you go to that place. I also think a Super Bowl ad can return well if it's done right, right? And in theory, there's other things that go around it, but I tend to go to digital marketing because the data is more rich, because audiences can be segmented much more effectively, because you can see a quicker win and a quicker return. And if you got a Google Analytics, you have the Facebook back end, a small company can see ROAS in days off of a buy. That's unobtainable to somebody with budgets that aren't in the tens of millions or hundreds of millions. But I am entirely media agnostic. I go to where the consumer is and ultimately where their behavior can be impacted.
Yeah, that consumer first approach is something I think we're all trying to practice a lot more. We've kind of been brought up in media to think channel focused first. And truly, it's about delivering the message in the medium where the consumer that you're trying to speak to is most likely to receive it in a favorable way. So let's talk about that through the lens of COVID a little bit. I mean, it's an overused theme at this point, but obviously the world changed for everyone in your category in April. And what were the first things you looked to change, to both take advantage of some unique market positioning and also to protect yourself to the downside?
Yeah, so you're totally right. 70% of our business was dine-in. We have a heavy concentration of restaurants that are in major cities, that are at the foot of the Google building kind of thing. And Google decided they're going to work from home for a year or two. So it did have a pretty big impact on brands that look like ours, brands like Shake Shack, brands like Starbucks, other brands that were seriously affected by this. The first thing we did as a company was, and this is all public, information, so I'm not going to disclose anything. Obviously, we haven't said in earnings calls, but the first thing we did was just protect the business. You got to shore cash up. That's where I cut. Anything that I couldn't show there was a return, that I felt confidence there would be a return. So you have to kind of first protect yourself, and then you work on, okay, well, what can we do? We launched some pretty innovative products. We never thought we'd be targeting dinner. We are a lunch destination for people at the office. That is the primary purpose of Potbelly in most locations. We started focusing on dinner. We started focusing on families, which again, we've never really done. Usually people are there with their coworkers or with a friend. They're usually not taking their families to a Potbelly in a lot of instances. So we created things like family meals. We created a whole system called Pantry. We were, I can, hold up the fact that we were one of the first to do that. We beat Panera, beat a bunch of other brands to that, where you actually could get the raw ingredients, the components of the products we sell delivered to your house in bulk and make your own set of sandwiches. We had one of our chefs actually show you how to make a wreck, which is like our signature sandwich at home in your oven using these things you order from Potbelly Pantry. We created deals that we're not a big dealing brand. We're a brand generally that uses deals very selectively and really among our loyalty platform to drive transactions. We had to do a bunch of dealing and are still doing dealing to try to incent people sort of away from that drive-through or that pizza that they might order. And then I think the final thing we did was it really put emphasis on off-premise and loyalty, any digital interaction. And normally I'm a huge fan of that anyway. That's the kind of thing we build out and we were building out. But it puts pressure on it like never existed. So, for us, we were able to scale our loyalty platform to over 2 million members during this, growing its base by a huge margin, creating a loyalty platform that actually influences behavior in real time, expanding to all third-party delivery apps, making sure our delivery systems are in place. And we're developing a lot of other technologies on the back end of that to make sure that stuff works. It was important to us before, but it wasn't the top priority. the top priority was, kind of get the basics right that we knew would let the brand start growing again. And when COVID hit, it doesn't really matter if your paint looks good or if your tables or seats are comfortable. It just doesn't matter anymore. You got to fix this other stuff now. So we did have to pivot pretty hard. And I think a lot of folks in the industry, and not just restaurants, but retail in general, have gotten really scrappy. And it's going to be fascinating to look back at 2020 and see what retailers were able to do to pull their business up by 40, 50 points or more in a lot of cases. I mean, when in anyone's career have you pulled a business up by, 50+% within a matter of 6 months on the sheer, horsepower of your team? That's crazy and awesome, but also a little scary. So yeah, we did have to pivot. A lot of it was about protection up front, but then it was really about innovation and making changes, and we're still doing that. We're going to be making changes over the next few months that are going to make us a leaner, stronger company that are going to allow our company to focus on a few things for a little while and get really good at those few things, and then worry about other stuff that ultimately will serve the brand for the future.
Necessity is an incredible motivator, and it's amazing what we can accomplish when we are given no other choice but to move forward. So I think you're absolutely right there. I want to ask a question about what you've learned through this process that you're going to apply moving forward. But you just mentioned some of these big focused bets, and that's now sparking a memory from our initial conversation where you really are a big proponent of choosing 2 or 3 things and doing those exceptionally well, rather than spreading yourself thin. And so presumably delivery and e-com and curbside pickup, which we can kind of group together, is going to be a cornerstone for you guys moving forward. But what are some other big bets you guys are making and you think you're also seeing across the QSR landscape in general?
I would say absolutely off-premise is a significant. So people that aren't investing right now in their tech stack, people that aren't investing in their third-party partners, people that aren't investing in ensuring that the experience through off-premise is stellar, are probably not going to do very well through this, and ultimately not do very well after this, because a lot of people are trying this for the first time and liking it. So that is obviously a big area of focus. The problem with that area is it takes a lot of time to get it live. So, a lot of people probably don't have the best experience, in play right now. They might have it in 6 months or a year, but that takes a lot of time and a lot of investment, frankly, to get live. For us, and this is stuff that we've actually started testing before the pandemic. We've got some opportunities in our menu. So we've been working on our menu to make sure that it's stronger, to make sure the offering is clear, to make sure that what we're good at, that we make sure that that we're a good value. Because value for us is you get a sandwich and it blows you away, and you are happy for the rest of the day. We say good vibes, great sandwiches, because it shifts the trajectory of your day. And we want to make sure our menu totally lives up to that. So that's a big change. And marketing actually owns a lot of that work. We work hand in hand with ops and IT and other management there, but marketing for Potbelly and many other brands I've worked for, we own that. So menu is a big shift. That's very important. Loyalty was a big shift. It was very important because you need to make sure we can hang on to those customers as they transition back into real life. We don't want the vaccine to hit, everybody's getting back to work, and all of a sudden they're not coming to Potbelly anymore. So making sure that we hang on to that and create that relationship and nurture that relationship through this was critical. So the push around loyalty was significant. And I think past that, our job is to still be a brand even through this. So we actually worked on our position through this, and I talked about that in our last earnings call. But we tightened up our position as a brand, our unique offer to the world that creates value for people. And that sounds crazy to work on, something so high level as a position during a pandemic, but it lets us make choices of what is going to be on that short list to focus on. And if it turns out we don't go do something that we've been talking about and wanting to do forever, great. If the position doesn't live up to it and it isn't on the priority list, don't do it. So yeah, I think we have a very short list of things that we generally work on. That doesn't mean experiment and try different things and push something new in market every now and then to see if it floats. But when you get down to it, I don't believe a team can actually get a lot done And you don't set them up for success for the future, frankly, and in the work if you don't have a pretty short list of priorities that you tackle. Definitely less than 10, ideally 3 or less.
Yeah, I mean, that's such great insight. And what you said about loyalty, I think is huge. That's true for every type of advertiser, whether it's a CPG, a retailer, a QSR, for a variety of reasons. Obviously, the deprecation of cookies and tracking and all these sorts of things. But having a direct relationship with your consumer is the most important thing a brand can have because it allows you to understand how to innovate, how to move forward, how to reach them effectively, et cetera. Brandon, I could ask questions all day of you, but I can see the chat is already full. So I'm going to do one more for me, and then we're going to pivot over to the audience questions. But since I personally care about media a great deal, I'd love your perspective moving forward, coming out of COVID. Obviously, there's been tremendous changes. What do you think media and media purchasing and media strategy looks like moving forward?
Yeah, I think the upfront process has been disrupted pretty hard, just in general. I think assumptions around reach levels in traditional media have been disrupted pretty hard. I think a lot of executives right now are getting a pretty deep education in performance marketing and what that means and why ROAS is meaningful and what happens to the lift in market when that ROAS looks good versus when it doesn't look good. I think the world is ripe for people who understand and embrace digital. But again, I warn that I think we can't forget that people are still people and everybody watches some TV, and whether it's on their phone or their iPad or their actual television. Super Bowl is still the highest rated show on TV. It just is. So I think the big shift here is a focus on down funnel and acknowledging the importance of down funnel. But really, it's more a focus on the idea that the toolbox is big. And you've got a lot of ways to be agile, to affect your business in a real way. And frankly, it's okay to not spend on media if it's not working. And I know that sounds sacrilege, but it's okay to cut the budget of something that's not working well. And that's scary. In a lot of organizations, you don't know what the effect is. And I'm never a proponent for going completely dark in media. I don't think that necessarily works. But I think you can make choices just because you've had a buy running for 5 years, or you have a relationship with a platform or a network or whatever that you signed a long-term agreement to. This is an opportunity for you to rethink what actually is working for your long-term brand goals and your short-term goals related to actual traffic and conversion and all that. So I think it's really about agility and it's about understanding the toolbox better. And that's a good thing. I think we're all going to get to be better marketers because it's going to be painful. It's going to be painful for a lot of folks. It's going to be painful for a lot of organizations, but that's okay. That's how you grow. You learn about the thing in the dark when you kick it, and we're stubbing some toes right now, but that's okay. It makes us smarter.
I think the word you used there at the very end was agility, and I think that's key. It's being comfortable, being able to make changes, and everything that enables that sort of strategy to be deployed is fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm gonna read some questions now from the audience, and I found this first one here at the top, which I like a lot because it was actually a question I wanted to ask you as well. And that is, you're always developing your abilities personally, and then of course your team's abilities. And what like to develop this, and how you go about building a team that can innovate and create waves?
Yeah, I think this year a lot of people are learning that they can't be a super niche player. So they have to kind of get good at a lot of things or get good at a lot of things that are at least tangential to the areas that their expertise lies. So I think the biggest thing the teams are developing is that agility, that ability to be effective in many ways for the organization, not just in one way. I think the team is learning to prioritize, and we're developing the ability to prioritize and ensure that we're working on the big things. I think, frankly, the team is learning about sacrifice right now and about what it is to give up the thing that you didn't think you should give up. And that's really hard, but But if something's your baby, and it's your baby because you loved working on it, or that brand is, if you're at an agency or whatever, that brand is the brand you love, but you might have to give it up because there's just not room for everything right now. You really do have to prioritize in your personal life too. I mean, I got a toddler running around upstairs. So you're having to make decisions about what you do and how you do it and what you prioritize. So I think really it's being a player that can help the organization more broadly and being willing to sacrifice. And even standing up and saying, "Hey, I'm not the right fit for this thing right now." That's okay too, because this is the time to focus to make sure that everything is adding significant value at every step.
I have another question here, which kind of falls under the same category, which is, as a marketing and technology leader, how do you think about structuring the teams you work with? And how do you recruit the sort of talent that's not only necessary today, all the things you just covered, but are going to position your team and your brand to take advantage of the continuing changes in our ecosystem and marketplace? How do you think about bringing those people on?
Yeah, I mean, to me, the structure all depends on the areas of focus, right? So if you say I'm going to focus on these two or three big things, then you ensure that the team that's in place can execute and those two or three focus areas appropriately. So I think that the team sort of follows the areas of focus pretty significantly. And as you have to think about, your resources and cutting back on what you spend on or G&A or whatever, it really boils down to what is the priority, and do you have what you need out of the team that you have to execute against your areas of focus. As far as attracting good people, I think good people are drawn by good work. And I know a CFO does not read Adweek. I know that. I have no problem with them, not understanding that Ad Age covering this thing we just did, well, what does that do for sales is the response. That's why you don't talk about it in that same context. But I guess who does read Adweek and Ad Age? Other marketers. So I think doing good work actually draws people to you. Generally, when I start at a place and I work on, the organization and building it out, I don't have a lot of trouble finding good people. You have to go through a lot of people to find the people that are the right fit for the priorities. But when you get down to it, doing good work draws in people. It just does. So I think that PR play that you did that got you on Ad Age, you got you an Ad Age, or that PR play you did that went viral on Twitter or whatever, those things are of huge value for recruitment, actually, and long term, I think for the viability of that brand, not necessarily though as transaction drivers. So the short answer is do good work and stick to those priorities.
When you keep it simple, it becomes much more simple to execute against those goals. So it's really good advice. I know in my personal life, I tend to make things way too complicated, but when you take a step back and you just really focus on the one or two priorities, the path becomes much more clear. So I think that's really good advice. With our final 3 minutes here, I'm going to leave us with this doozy. This is a big one. We can go a lot of different directions, but it's, what trends in consumer behavior are of particular importance to you and you think to other marketers in your space? And then I guess the follow-up question to that is, how does that affect media consumption as well? And so you've touched on some of this before. People are now ordering food digitally more than they ever have before, and they're probably figuring out, I like this. This is pretty easy. What trends are really standing out to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two sets of trends. One set of trends is related directly to COVID and what happens after COVID, and the other is sort of just general trends that are occurring. I think some of the general trends first that I think will still sustain after COVID and are still relevant. One great example is the explosion of influencer marketing. I know that sounds like old hat right now, but the truth is that conversion is almost to the point where it's commercialized fully, right? If you'd have gone back 3 years and talked about influencer marketing, people would have said you're nuts. They said you're going to have a girl named Charlie on a platform where teens are dancing is going to become a brand advocate for a bank. That's really going to happen. That happened last week. So I think the role of somewhat informal marketing communications through sources like influencers is becoming the mainstream now. And that's a huge trend for marketing that I don't think every brand has fully come to terms with. It's used as a buzzword, and because it's been around for a few years, most people are at least dabbling in it or comfortable with it. But who would have thought there'd be a Travis Scott meal at McDonald's? And it's awesome. That's awesome. It's awesome that sort of democratization of the ability to actually influence, people's behavior, but also affect businesses is amazing. So I think that's one trend, is just the changing nature of marketing. You don't need necessarily a Michael Bay produced ad that runs on $1 million ad unit on television to affect your business. You can actually do it in a lot of ways now. That toolbox is big and it can be very effective. I think the second, the second area I would talk about is just these COVID changes. We don't know what's going to happen after this, but I would imagine that people are going to want a bit more real world connection for a while. I know I am not going to eat at home for 2 years with my family after this, just because the opportunity is going to be to reconnect with real stuff. But there's going to be a lot of legacy things that people got comfortable with and still do. So I think, some of this is going to stick, but also there's going to be an opportunity to have real experiences for a while. There's a generation right now that's going to be changed forever because of this. Maybe we're all going to be changed forever because of this. And I think they're going to be seeking out things that are much more real, much more tangible, and get them a bit out of the house for a while. Maybe not permanently, but for a while.
Brandon, that's amazing. Thank you. Thank you for your time today. Thank you for the insight. I know I learned a tremendous amount. I hope everyone in the audience got some fantastic insights and nuggets as well. I'm going to keep a couple of those in my head that are probably going to come up on a presentation a week from now. So thank you very much for joining us. And James, we'll kick it back over to you.
Great. Thanks, Colin. Brandon, just quickly, I loved what you said about how you guys have become a leaner, stronger company. I think we've seen that a lot throughout the industry. And one thing I liked about this topic, guys, and Colin, how you frame things up is it wasn't just about what's happening at Potbelly. It's what's happening in the industry, what's happening in personal lives, because none of this is easy. It's endlessly complex, nuanced, and new. So thank you both again. And with that, we're going to transition to our next topic. So I want to introduce to you two sensational people.